Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Bruner, and I'm with the Museum on Main. And today we're interviewing Michael Faber. And Michael's been a longtime resident of Pleasanton.
40 years now.
40 years. And he was also a former board member. But today he's going to share his story with us. So, where were you born, Mike?
Well, originally I was born in Evanston, Illinois, which is right outside of Chicago, suburb of Chicago. And we moved to Southern California in 1957.
And I think you had a very interesting life down there.
I did, indeed. My father and mother were both very, very talented individuals. My father became an executive at CBS, and he used to run news throughout the United States. And in fact, he is the reason that we now have fire drills in schools.
Oh, that happened.
Well, there was a fire in Chicago, and he brought his news crew in, and a number of children died, and it was a Catholic school as well as some of the instructors. And he realized and learned that schools throughout the United States did not have fire alarms or fire drills. So he put a national program together, did an expose on CBS News, and why schools don't have this. And that started the national movement of firearms and school, fire drills. So he did that in Illinois, and we moved.
And what year was that? In the 50s?
Yeah, in the 50s. Okay. So we moved to Southern California in 1958. And in 1958, he formed a new division of CBS called CBS Films. He became the director of CBS Films. Now,
he'd been a news person before.
He was in news, right. He'd been in news, but what was happening was technology and the industry and television was changing. And what was happening was you had this program called I Love Lucy.
Yes.
And Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz was a true genius. He was the brains behind the whole company. And what had been happening in the entertainment industry is television shows were being produced live, and then that was the end of it, and it went away. So Desi Arnaz came up with the idea of a 3-camera system where they would record the program, save it in the can, and then they could do reruns. And that had never been done before.
Oh.
So it was Desi Arnaz who came up with the idea of reruns. Well, the other thing that was interesting is that CBS Television, and my uncle happened to be one of the original founders at CBS Television. He was on the board. He was president and CEO of the stations and all that.
Now, was he your...
He was on my mother's side.
On your mother's side.
On my mother's side. In fact, my mother and father met at NBC. My mother was a feminist at the very early days of feminism in the late 40s.
Okay.
She was the only woman manager at NBC, and that's where my father met my mother at NBC. And at any rate, so what was happening was television shows were being produced, but they were in the air. They were either what the show was over. The Show of Shows was a very famous show that was gone. So Desi Arnaz came up with that idea, and CBS was so cheap that they refused to pay for the cost of the film. And so Desi Arnaz said, okay, here's what I'll do. Lucy and I will pay all the costs, but we get to keep all the syndication rights, the right to resell them. And that was the deal. So of course the shows were then produced, and CBS had over 200 stations were affiliates, and the show became very, very popular. So the idea came out of my uncle that what we should do is we should form a division in California that would produce television shows and then syndicate them around the world. And these television shows would be a variety of different kinds of shows. So my father linked up with people like Al Simon at Filmways Studios. He linked up with just a variety of different companies, Paramount Studios. And my father was responsible for television shows, Beverly Hills, Green Acres, Petticoat Junction, I Love Lucy, Hogan's Heroes, The Andy Griffith Show, Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart, Carol Burnett.
Making reruns of all those.
Yeah, but actually doing the
filming,
shows too.
Yeah.
His job, he would pull together the financing, he would work with other people, and then they would create the shows, and then his organization would then syndicate it. So it was a very interesting, process. And as a child growing up in a household like that, since I was the only son, my father and I were very close, so he took me with him everywhere. So as a kid, I spent, like, he loved fishing. So he and I would go fishing with the guy named Eric Fleming, and Eric Fleming was on a television show called Rawhide, my father did, and my father hired Clint Eastwood to be on that show, with him. And the television show The Twilight Zone, remember who?
Right.
Rod Serling?
Yes.
Okay, so there was a threesome. It was Rod Serling and Eric Fleming and myself, and we would go fishing all the time.
Oh.
And my father tells the story, and by the way, there's 4 hours of his life. He's one of the top 100 people in Hollywood. They recorded 4 hours of his life. The Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, which is the Emmys, did a whole series on my father. It was really kind of
What was
interesting.
his name?
George Faber.
Okay.
Now, in his 4 hours of talking about Hollywood, he talks about only his publicist side. He didn't discuss, because the publicist side was the fun part.
Yeah.
And he didn't discuss all of the things he had to do to put the companies together and the programs together. But it was really neat. And one of my childhood memories is we had gone fishing, and Rod Serling stood us up. And you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and so my father said, we're going to go and take one of the fish we catch, and we're going to take it to Rod's house, and we're going to shove it in his mail slot.
Oh.
And so when he gets back, he'll know that he missed catching fish. Well, we didn't know he was gone for a week. And so imagine a dead fish in your house for a week. That was, And then as a child, my father decided that he and Jim Arness, who was the star of Gunsmoke, were going to buy a ski resort in Mammoth. So I was with him again, and we drove up to Mammoth Mountain to look at ski resorts. And when I was being babysat,
Did he buy one?
no, because they decided that Mammoth Mountain was too far away, and who would want to drive from LA up to Mammoth Mountain? And I kept saying, oh, come on, Dad, Mr. Arness, you got to do that. And as a child, when filming was being done, I would be on all the sets, like he did Andy Griffith, so with Ron Howard, who was younger. If I couldn't be on the set, he would get one of the stars to watch me at their house. So he did Beverly Hillbillies, and Irene Ryan, who was a granny, I used to stay at her house a lot, or Bea Benaderet, and anyway, she was in a television show called Petticoat Chuncher.
So how was Irene Ryan?
She was one of the nicest people. There were some really rotten people. I remember Ross Martin, who was in the Wild Wild West, my father did. He was a nasty guy. And then there were just really sweet guys, and women, like John Banner, who was Sergeant Schultz. We used to go, he was the nicest man. He died of a heart, I think it was a heart explosion of some valve or something like that. But anyway, that was the childhood. And it really prepared me for Pleasanton.
Yeah.
And I'll be explaining kind of why.
Okay, but first I want to say, who was your favorite actor that you...
Well, it wasn't Clint Eastwood. We used to take scripts out to his house because when the show was canceled, he just bought a house and he had a little girl. And we were worried. My father was worried he wouldn't have any money. But I think it was probably John Banner who was Sergeant Schultz. Well, Andy Griffith was just the nicest. As far as the female side, my father had a very, very close relationship with Carol Burnett, and also Donna Douglas, who was Ellie Mae Clampett.
Right.
But Carol Burnett was very, very sweet. When my father died, she was just fantastic, and she wrote the nicest letter. And then Mary Tyler Moore was wonderful. My uncle's home was on the 9th hole of the golf course in Bel Air, on the Bel Air Country Club, and he sold his house to Mary Tyler Moore and Grant Tinker, who was another big producer. And when my uncle died, I have in my office this beautiful letter from Mary Tyler Moore saying what a wonderful family we had, and it's. So Mary Tyler Moore was wonderful, and Carol Burnett was particularly nice to me as a kid.
She always seemed like such
Very
a nice
good, with
person.
her tug.
So real. So real.
And she was.
Yeah.
And she was. There were some that were, not. But it was a fascinating upbringing. So we have in our family, we've got a lot of entrepreneurs and inventors. So on my father's side, we have my father, and our distant relatives are the Fabers of Germany, Eberhard Faber Pencil Company. So that group has over 138 patents, I think it is. And so we were involved, the family was involved in developing the pencil. We have patents on the advancement of the pencil, the mechanical pencil. You want to know why pencils are yellow?
Why?
Okay, so originally pencils were made with lead.
Yes.
And the family was looking for a way of getting rid of the lead and a better material for writing. So graphite was discovered, and I think it was discovered in a bog in England. And the idea was to find where you could get large amounts of graphite to manufacture huge numbers of pencils. So the largest deposit of graphite in the world was in China, and the royal color of China is yellow. So when the pencil was launched, you know, the Eberhard Faber Castell pencils were launched, they were launched in yellow, and this was the royal pencil that would take care of all your issues of writing utensils.
Oh,
So there's still a family
interesting story,
castle
yes.
that's outside of Rothenburg, Otober, if you've ever been there in
Yeah.
Germany. So we had inventions there, and then on my mother's side, my great uncle invented something of which there are probably billions sold. Of all things, I was looking at the patent this morning before coming here. I think it was 1905. He invented the bucket with a mop wringer on it. The yellow type, but they weren't yellow in those days; they were metal. But so I have that original patent in my office of the bucket with the mop wringer. So I was very fortunate in that I had business people and I had inventors in the family.
Very creative thinking.
Yes. Yes. But we also had, in the family, we always had the approach that you had to do this on your own. So I paid my own way through college. That was just what we did, and I had to make my own way. So I went to UCLA, and we're going to get into how this has benefited Pleasanton.
Okay.
So at UCLA, I got 3 degrees in UCLA, and I was also involved in the environmental movement. And in 1972, I became chairman of the Sierra Club Southern California Public Relations Committee. And it was our job to get environmental issues solved through political action. So I was a surfer growing up in Santa Monica and at UCLA. And we used to love to surf in Malibu. And as you'd walk in Malibu, your problem would be you'd have clumps of oil on your feet from the oil rigs. And people were continuing to build houses along the coast. So we thought if there was a way of protecting the coastline from development and from oil drilling, we would have a much better state. Well, we were able to, a whole group of us were able, along with some other environmentalists in the Sierra Club, we were able to get a bill before the California Senate and Assembly to protect the coastline. And unfortunately, the day of the vote, Senator Wedworth was bought off, no offense, but by realtors. And so he didn't show, so it didn't pass. So we all got very upset. And 2 of my buddies, Doug Ball and Dick Yingst, decided that we were going to write our own law. So Proposition 20, the coastal bill, was written by my friends and associates. And we then got Proposition 20 passed in California, which protects the entire coastline. That's the Coastal Commission. So I remember sitting in our room at UCLA writing the language of the Proposition 20. Now, how that would help Pleasanton years later, and I'll get into how we got to Pleasanton, but I'll skip ahead. Once we're in Pleasanton, we were very involved, and there was this guy named Ben Tarver. I had been very involved with one of the nicest guys around, Ken Mercer, for a number of reasons. In fact, Ken and I had a very close association. I was there when he was dying in the hospital bed, and it was just...
He was a wonderful man.
He was
council
wonderful,
and
he always was interested in what was best for the community.
Yes.
It's like city managers. Deborah Acosta is the finest city manager in 40 years because Deborah worked for the city, not for herself.
Yes.
And I'll get into that a little later on. Nelson was not bad either, but at any rate, so we go back to that time period and the Ridgelands. Okay, there was this whole talk of Ridgelands development. Well, I had been successful in protecting an entire coastline, not me alone, because I had a great team, and I was just one of the team.
Yeah.
But when I met with Ben, the late Ben Tarver, I began to explain.
And Ben was mayor at the time.
He was mayor of Pleasanton at the time. And so I got involved in the background of establishing ways that this could all be done from a legal perspective.
Okay.
And, this is the first time, only twice in my time in Pleasanton have I made the mistake, and this may be one of them, of describing who we are and what we've done, because I've always stayed in the shadows, as you're
Right.
very much aware. And that was my father, too. My father stayed in the shadows, and the first time anybody knew about him, besides the Emmy, was when the Academy recorded 4 hours of his life. So Ben and I sat down, we talked a lot about what could be done, and we were able to protect the Ridgelands from 3,300 homes between that and between the fairgrounds. And the second time that my political action related to development was helpful to Pleasanton is the Bondi Ranch was being sold. And when the Bondi Ranch was sold, which is right behind my house, Chappelle Homes, Woody Pereira, wonderful guy, but he was working for Chappelle Homes,
Yeah.
wanted to build a massive development. The plan was to take hundreds of thousands of square feet, cubic yards of dirt, lower the mountain, and put a massive development back there. Well, I had learned from my experience that farmers, and this was the case with the Bondis, were, by the way, how are we on the time? Do we have enough time?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So farmers generally would sign onto what was called the Williamson Act.
Correct.
And so with the Williamson Act, a farmer didn't have to pay property taxes at the same rate as everyone else
Yes.
did. And it was to encourage the idea of farms being, operated without paying property tax. If you wanted to sell your property under the Williamson Act and you had been under it, you could sell it to a developer, but it could not be built. It would be 10 years before the day you came out of the Williamson Act till when you could actually start construction, unless you paid the back taxes. So the typical thing that would happen was, like Chappelle came in, property was under contract, and the plan was to pay the back taxes so they could start this massive development. Now, the way you could stop that as an environmentalist is no one ever challenged the paying of back taxes. There's a clause in the Williamson Act that if you challenge it, it has to go through court. And you could delay for years the process. And if you kept appealing the ruling, you could have 10 years before anything was built. So here was Chappelle Homes. They had the land that they were going to buy. They were going to have this massive development. And I went, no, no, no. So, when we get further ahead, I'll describe a little bit more. But I was, because of all of my now I have 82 patents, but at the time I had 35, I was spending $9 million a year on litigation, and I had 7 law firms. And we basically met with Chappelle, and I also was one of their largest commercial renters of facilities, office space, for Chappelle.
Oh, okay.
So, and there are 2 groups. At the time, there was Chappelle developing houses, and there was Chappelle that was the commercial.
Okay.
So I was on the commercial side, and I said, we're not going to do this. What we will do is we'll get together something called the Pleasanton Regional Homeowner Association, and you can find everything I'm describing, you can look up, you'll be able to look up in the annals of the budgets and whatever, and we're going to get the whole neighborhood together, and if you go for a much, much, much smaller development, you agree not to take the mountain down.
Yeah.
You make it so you will take it down about 200 cubic yards, enough so all the houses will be low enough so all the existing houses have a view easement, which is why behind my house and
Yeah.
all the neighborhood, you'll notice that the houses are lower. So the roof line can't be any higher than the lowest window of the homes around it.
Okay.
But you don't take this mountain off. You give the mountain to the city, okay, so it becomes city property. And you also do the following. A classic thing was done with Cottinger Ranch that a developer does is when they build the houses, they build them up the side of the street, and then they leave a gate open for the fire department, supposedly. The fire department usually doesn't use those gates. So what you want to do is build the houses in a ring at every one of the cul-de-sacs. So they're houses so they can't develop behind the development. So if you don't cut down the mountain, you give it to the city, you make bigger houses, you provide view easements, the regional homeowner associations, and I'll get all the homeowners together and we will support the developments. You can do it. And Chappelle was wonderful. They were reasonable, and that's how the development along Brunel got done. The other thing we did is we said, there was supposed to be the ring around Pleasanton. That was the idea.
Yeah.
Okay. So we said, if you're going to do the ring around Pleasanton, we don't want massive traffic on Burnell. It's bad enough already now, but the plan was it was going to be 4 lanes. So you'd have Burnell looping around 4 lanes. It would connect all the way around to Valley, and you'd have this huge traffic. And every time there was a backup on the freeway, you would have this monster of traffic going around the city with the noise for the neighbors.
Right.
So the other deal is sitting with the mayor and the city council. We said, okay, that's got to be 2 lanes, and that's why Burnell is 2 lanes to keep it from being, a freeway.
Yeah.
So that was the environmental side that benefited Pleasanton. Now we'll get to how we got here.
Yeah.
I wound up, after getting my 3rd degree, going to work for Xerox Computer Division, and the computer division was responsible for communications and networking throughout the world for Xerox Corporation and for others. And when I was there, I invented a technology using something called spread spectrum, where you could take and create data information using satellite transmissions. And you could take a satellite video transponder. Now, I didn't mention that as a kid, too, my father wanted to be involved in the technical side of the business. So at the age of 18, I was the assistant producer of satellite feeds for the Miss Universe contest in Hong Kong. And I had to set up all the satellite feeds at 18, and I was in a control room operating.
So they did satellites already at that point in time?
It was all video.
Okay.
It was video, but it wasn't data.
Okay.
And so in the old days, you had 24 baud telephone lines that would talk to everything very slow. And you hear that little beep, 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 like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So my concept was, if you could take that the idea of a data line, then take it, space segment it, put it on a video transponder, of which there were lots for transmitting video, like Miss Universe. Yeah. And then within that space segment had this thing called spread spectrum. You could take a video satellite and turn it into a massive data satellite, and you could have downlinks everywhere, which is exactly what Musk is doing right now.
Yeah.
With Starlink. Same thing, but this was back in 1980, 1979, 1980. Wow. If you could do that with the space segment, you could have data lines, everywhere. And so that was the idea. Xerox brought me in. By the time after 5 years there, they made me head of all engineering and operations, and I put that product to use. When I left, I understood it made Xerox $300 million. What they paid me was $1, and they gave my wife, Carol, and I tickets around the world. And I said, okay, I don't want to do this for a company where I don't have any rights to anything. And I wound up being hired by British Petroleum, who brought me up here to start a new division called SciCon, where we would take my technology and use it to transmit data to everything from wellheads, to tell a wellhead in the North Sea to turn on and off, to taking gas stations and putting downlinks at BP gas stations for credit card checking. So we created the algorithm for that. I worked for BP for about 2 years, but how I got specifically to Pleasanton is at that time we have 5 kids now. We had 2 kids, a little baby on the way, or had just been born, and we wound up looking for a place that was a wonderful community with great schools that was very interested in helping people. And at the time, I think there were 35,000 people in Pleasanton when we moved here. And my VP of engineering at British Petroleum said, look at Pleasanton. He lived in Sunol.
Oh, okay.
So Carol and we wanted the schools to be local. We liked Sunol, but the problem with Sunol is that it was just too far away from the high schools, we felt.
Yeah.
Anyway, the day we went to see Pleasanton, it was 105 degrees.
Oh.
And we went to downtown Pleasanton, and my wife and I looked at ourselves and we go, whoa, this is so hot here. This is terrible. But we loved the environment. And within 2 weeks, we said, we're going to make an offer on a house. And we made an offer on the house that we're still in, Abbey Street, 40 years later. So for a year, I commuted because I still had offices down in Southern California. Every day I would fly from LAX to San Jose. A British Petroleum car would pick me up. I'd go to the office, go to work, and then I would turn around and go back. While I was at British Petroleum, now what also benefited Pleasanton is I took a technology. I am a ham radio operator.
Okay.
And determined that it would be great if there was a way of injecting time into everything. So let's talk about this. In the old days, you had a VCR,
Yeah.
and the clocks always flashed, right?
Yeah.
Your daylight savings time.
You had to
You
go
know,
change
you have to
everything.
change all the clocks. So if there was a way, I thought, of transmitting time through the National Bureau of Standards, which they do, which is how they control the military, and inject time ticks into that time signal, daylight savings bit, and then taking all of that and putting it in a chip. You could have a chip in a VCR so the lights wouldn't flash. You could have watches that would always be receiving time, which, by the way, Casio uses my technology today. You could do all of those things, and at the same time, for the military, you could better control something called GPS, which is in your cars today. So a fellow engineer and I went to the Bureau of Standards in Colorado, and we wound up cutting a deal with the federal government. They could use all the technology and everything we were writing for government purposes. We could have the commercial rights. So when we did that,
So the government didn't pay you anything?
not a dime, we did
You
it
gave
for
it
free.
to them. Okay.
We just had to sit and write software. The other thing that I learned at that time from some good patent attorneys we had is to name everybody that has any inventive part of the patent on the patent. So if you look at all my patents, you'll see that I'm co-inventor. Even if I come up with the idea, if you're sitting with me and you come up with an idea that can help it, I want your name on the patent as well. And it helps that individual because if they ever get another job, they can say, I have a patent. But it also in litigation helps because I've been on the stand for years. I was being, deposed. Did you really invent this? How could you invent that? Well, I invented this part. That individual invented that part. So Charlie Erkin was his name, and we wound up writing the software that now, when you go to a gas station, if you see the satellite dish, that's the technology. As the company was being developed, Carol and I had a belief, like my family, that you need to, whatever it is, pay it forward. And we would always take a certain amount of our income and donate that to the local community, to things that we felt were really important. So the United Methodist Church on Black Avenue, we gave them $1 million to build the sanctuary and the education center. That was local. We gave $1 million to the Boy Scouts to build the Boy Scout Center in San Leandro. I was chairman of the board and whatever. While I was doing that company, the company that really benefited Pleasanton came along. And that company I took public in 1993, I took it public. I invented and patented TV guide on screen. So if you have a TV guide in a cable box, a satellite dish, if you're on the internet, one of my patents covers the channel bar on the internet. So Microsoft had to pay the company 25 cents for every copy worldwide of Internet Explorer. I had to negotiate that with Bill Gates because you can't do the internet without coming through our patents. And that's why we spent the $9 million a year in litigation with the 7 law firms, because we always had people stealing our stuff, including Rupert Murdoch on Fox. And so I was in litigation with him in San Jose in front of Judge White. We were winning, and so they kind of had a choice, and they bought my company. And so 27 years ago now, I retired from that company. But what we wound up doing is we said, what did Pleasanton need? Now, we have been very active in the schools.
Yes, with your
Big time.
kids and
with
all
the kids,
that.
because 5 kids,
Yeah.
now 13 grandkids.
Yeah.
5 of them right now are still in Pleasanton. 3 are out of school, and then 5 of them live 2 in San Leandro, grandkids, and 3 up in Roseville area, Granite Bay. So we continue to participate in the schools big time. So even though I had these companies, every Monday I would have my staff hide me, and I would go and I'd work in Valley View Elementary School, Pleasanton Middle School, and Foothill High School, volunteering in kids' classrooms, including in special education. So I got to know all the teachers very, very, very well. And it was fun for me. I was the only dad in the schools
Oh, yeah.
every Monday. And I got to know a guy during that process named Bill James, who's the superintendent. He's passed away. And Bill and I began to work together on a number of projects, we wound up funding, like at Horizon High School, we funded the play equipment for the kids, all the computers we bought for Amador High School. And Bill came to me and said, the schools are in disarray, we need to have a bond issue to take the schools and renovate them. So we're going to come up with a bond issue to do that. $70 million bond issue was the original plan. So another wonderful guy, there are a couple of people that really have helped Pleasanton dramatically. One is Joe Callahan, who I love. He's the sweetest guy, and he's given so much to the city, and he's got businesses here and whatever. And Jim McKeon with Signature Properties.
Oh.
And Jim did, Ruby Hills, right? Well, we sat down with Jim, and Jim brought to us the Bond King of California. His last name was Tramatola, Larry Tramatola, I think it was. And he taught us how to get a bond issue passed.
Oh.
And the city has had failed bond issues,
Yes.
and there's a reason for that. So Joe said to actually Gene Pons, my neighbor of 40 years and a close friend, and I'm sure you've interviewed him.
Yes.
Because he's got an incredible life here.
Yeah. Wonderful
And-
stories.
Yes, and in the case of when they came to us, they said, why don't you and Gene team up? Because he has the connection with all of Pleasanton. You, Mike Faber, have the knowledge and technology and the legal background. So Larry said to Gene and I, and we had Tom Pico, who was the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
We had Tom Pico in the meeting, and of course it was all set up by Signature Properties. He said, here's how you get a bond issue passed. The first thing you have to do is put together a detailed write-up of what you want the money for. What are you going to use it for? And Bill James and Buster McCurtain, another important person in education, put together something called the Blue Book. So Gene and I would have this detailed book, room by room, classroom by classroom, doorknobs, whatever,
Oh, wow.
what the money was going to be spent on.
Yeah.
Because Larry said you had to go to the public and give them a reason. Not this is one of our failed bond issues in Pleasanton, is they wanted money, but they weren't telling it what it was
Yeah,
for.
yeah.
Oh, come on. That was the first thing. The second thing they said is you have to get buy-in. And the buy-in you get has to be from your stakeholders, which are the teachers. You need to have the teachers sit with you and work on what is it needed in that school for me as a teacher. So you have buy-in. And additionally, you need to get those nasty people who are going to oppose you. And there was one particularly nasty person who is still involved in the city, and this individual was negative, always attacking the school board. So Gene, who's a genius, says, let's bring her on. And so that individual participated in the bond issue because then they had the buy-in. So we were doing everything that Larry said. Okay. The third thing he said is you need to go to the voters that will vote. Parents don't vote. It's shocking. They do not vote. They're busy. They don't show up and vote. Teachers vote if they're residents,
Right.
but the people that vote are the seniors.
Yes.
Seniors always vote. They have a great desire to support America and democracy, and they vote. Therefore, you need to go to the seniors. Gene and I had this massive effort. We set up meetings with every senior organization. We went to Vineyard Villas and we set up a polling station there. The teachers volunteered to drive people to the ballot, to their location for voting if they
Okay.
couldn't vote. The teachers were magnificent.
Ah.
So therefore, we did all of those things. The buy-in, right up. Gene is great as a presenter. He would do most of the presentations because he was an old-time resident. And, we won, I think it was the highest level in the state of California ever. I think it was 77% is what we won at the ballot box. 77%.
And what year was this?
Oh, golly, I don't know. It was in the 90s, I think.
Yeah, sometime.
Yeah.
See, that's amazing. Yeah.
So we were excited, particularly on the environmental side.
Yeah.
It could have impact on the city, all behind the scenes. The school district, we could impact, you tell me a need, I'll see how it could get funded. And that was great. And then the third thing is my wife and I decided we wanted to give back to the city as a whole. And we had become very good friends, as I said, with Ken Mercer. And also, even though he was a little crazy, but a good guy, Tom Pico. And we began giving to different types of activities in the city. For example, the city wanted to put in a skateboard park.
Mm-hmm.
So we funded, I think it was $40,000 for the design, I think that's what it was, of the skateboard park. And then I had a councilwoman named Cheryl Michelati,
Yeah.
and Cheryl said, we've got this great hospital, can you get involved in the hospital? So I wound up getting involved heavily in the hospital, and the idea was to be able to fund Valley Care as best we could. I got on the medical foundation board of the doctors, and anyway, I got involved with the hospital. We began funding, the hospital. I was the reference for Marcy Fight to get her job, because back to the old days of my mother and women's rights, she felt that a woman should be running the hospital. And again, I was the one that got the board to, bring in Marcy. Controversial later, but she was a wonderful person who did a lot of great things for the hospital.
Good.
She really did. Anyway, so teaming up with a guy named John Madden, between John Madden and us, we were the largest private donors to Valley Care for quite a period of time. And when they opened the Rose Hotel, the Maddens and the Fabers were at the hotel. We had the guest rooms and whatever. And they donated all the money to the opening of the Pleasanton Hotel to the hospital.
I did not know that.
Which is an amazing
Wonderful.
thing. John was just a great guy.
Yeah.
And his son, who had cancer, I think.
Mike, yeah.
Mike, wonderful guy. And
Yeah.
I remember that night at the Rose Hotel because it was fantastic. John or not John, but Mike and his wife and Carol, my wife and I, were there, and all this money is flowing in, and it's all going to the hospital. Imagine that. Your opening night of a hotel, and you're giving all the proceeds fully booked, all the revenues from the bar, everything, 100%.
To the hospital.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
It's like with Joe Callahan, funding all these things without people, knowing it.
Yeah.
So, we had been doing these various things, and we began, and in education, we also started the PSEE, the Pleasanton Schools Educational Enrichment Foundation.
Yes.
And we started that because the schools didn't have good arts programs, and one of the things that made me a little upset with Pleasanton is when we moved to Pleasanton, Bill James had a whole program, ROP program for students 40 years ago.
Yep.
You had, within the high schools, you had a nursing program. You had metal shop. You had wood shop. They used to have buses. We used to bus everybody around Pleasanton. The buses were being maintained by kids at Amador High School. And so you were teaching kids to do things other than going to college. Because when Gene and I did the bond campaign, we learned a number of things. While the schools in Pleasanton are good, they're not the best in the nation. Only at that time, 33% of all kids ever complete college that go to the high school. So it sounds great that you got all these kids going, but that means that they're doing other things,
Yeah.
which they need to be carpenters and electricians. And, our oldest son, U.S. Marine Transport. One of our sons has been 15 years at Valley Care. He runs night engineering. But not college. This is engineering, for engineering, running a building. So that had disappeared, and it was my wife's feeling that really you needed to do other kinds of things.
Because you have students who want to do those other things.
Yes.
Yes.
It's like I have a daughter-in-law who's gone into nursing back now, and she's an amazing person. And she's 40, but she's decided she wants to become a nurse. Well, that would have been nice if she had had that opportunity, in high school. So finally, the last thing we decided to do is work with the city to have a mechanism of funding that would give to programs. So I sat down with Deborah McKeon, and you can look in the budgets of Pleasanton. We established the Faber Fund within the city of Pleasanton, and it had not been done before, but genius Deborah came up with it. We donated, I don't remember, maybe by the time we had gotten there, about $800,000 gave it to the city of Pleasanton, either 5 or 8 or something, and that became the mechanism for funding activities within Pleasanton. So,
Like what activity?
well, all the respirators for the fire department came from that fund. We had out of the fund for the Pleasanton Police Department, and that fund continued to pay for these things up in the last distribution of the fund was one of our police chiefs. I'm trying to remember, David, I forget his name. Anyway, he was the last one to distribute the funds. The funds were used for education of police officers, SWAT training, community relations, whatever. So the police department got this allocation. I would sit down with Deborah. We would say, okay, this much should go to the police, this much should go to fire. We funded the library renovations, the senior center. One of my youngest son, Alameda County Sheriff's Deputy, at 14, his Eagle Project was the 10th anniversary of the senior center with the mayor and Supervisor Haggerty, and money went into doing anything that was needed to improve the senior center programs. Pretty much, Deborah would go around to the departments and say, what do you need? We have this pot of money. And then she would sit with me, and then Nelson did the same thing. Nelson followed on to that. And then we would say, okay, but from a legal perspective, once you've donated, I could not say it must go here.
Oh, yeah.
If I do, it's not tax deductible. It's not tax deductible. It needs to be the decision of the city. So I could influence by saying, well, I think that's a nice idea, but you've got to decide. So the money was spread around Pleasanton. So and then, as I said, 27 years ago, I technically retired. I sold the company to Rupert Murdoch, and we're still have been actively involved. So we only made, this is the only other time, and I'm hoping it's not a mistake, because what happened is the Tri-Valley Herald, if you go back in the archives, did an article on us, and they called me the Bill Gates of Pleasanton. And there's a picture of myself we only had 4 kids, I think, at the time, and it was talking about our philanthropic whatever, and it was really hard for the kids in school because, oh, you're the Fabers, whatever. But I think one of the neatest things that happened to us is we did receive, in I think it was 1990, the United States Congress has a book of good deeds or good deed individuals around the United States. In fact,
and your name is in there.
Well, what happened, we got nominated and we were selected, so we're in the book, United States Congress, presented by the congressional representative at the time, Carol Nyer. And I've got I was looking this morning because I was trying to figure the date, and I know we're on camera here, but I think...
But that's very nice.
But it's like it made us feel really good, and this is the only, so there it is, the Book of Golden Deeds from the United States Congress. It was given to us in 2000, March the 10th of 2000.
But I never knew that they had that. But I love the title, Book of Golden Deeds.
Yes.
And you well deserved it. I mean, you really have
but
done a lot of nice things.
We've never done this again, we've stayed very, very low profile.
Right.
I had to wrestle with even us talking today.
Yeah.
Because we've never been politicians. Politicians like, look at me, look at me, look at me. I was raised in a household where you did good deeds and you're supposed to do that. And we didn't get any benefit for ourselves like people that have businesses within the community can benefit too. We just want to do what's right. Now the big benefit is to our children.
Yeah.
We got a wonderful education. If I look at the 5 kids, we've got the oldest son running operations, shipping operations for Costco in Atlanta with 3 grandkids. We got the second son who is executive vice president of Penumbra. It's a New York Stock Exchange company. They do transplants, they do stents. Then he runs all their operations around the world. Graduated at Amador in '99 and went to I think it was Cal State East Bay for his master's degree. The third son, 15 years running night engineering at Valley Care Hospital. My daughter, her Eagle project was.
She was a Boy Scouts already at that point?
No, she's a gold Girl Scout.
Okay.
Very rare.
Yes.
But my wife and I were Girl Scout leaders. My wife, great troop leader. So she became a gold Girl Scout. And Shepherd's Gate is in Livermore.
Correct.
And so my daughter's, her gold Girl Scout project was putting together a program to help when young ladies came off the street and they needed help, whatever. She put packages together. She put fundraising together. So that was her project, which was really nice. We got the kids involved. We are the founders. We have the Martin Award from Hope Hospice. We founded the program in Hope Hospice to help children whose parents were dying of cancer, to help them get through, the trauma. But these are all things that you can look in the community and you can go, wow, we did that. Don't tell
But
anybody.
nice for your grandchildren to know that you guys did this and that you cared that much about the community and other people. And, like you said, it wasn't just for me and it wasn't for me to show off to people.
Right.
That's the lovely thing. I
Yes.
mean, you're very humble about it. And
But that's the way we're supposed to be, aren't we? I mean, isn't
Yes.
that the way that,
yeah, but
until, as I said, until the 4 hours of my father's life, George Faber was often in the only thing that was funny is if you listen to television shows carefully, the old reruns, our name will be in pretty much every show. The trail boss in Rawhide was Gil Faber with a V instead of a B. If you watch Green Acres, Dr. Faber was the doctor. My father would insert our name in all these shows, just
a little bit.
It's kind of like what was the actor or what was the producer who did Psycho, and a very famous guy. He was in every movie in a cameo. Right, he's kind of a big round guy.
Yes,
yeah. But anyway, so
Hitchcock.
Alfred Hitchcock, yeah. Every movie has Alfred Hitchcock in a cameo.
Yes.
Including The Birds, where he's coming out of the store. Well, my father didn't do that. He just popped his name, in the different shows. So it's been a wonderful ride, and Pleasanton is just a spectacular place. It's changed dramatically. As we talked about on the phone, it used to be much more, because it was a small town. When the floods hit on Cottinger Ranch, our church, Linwood United Methodist, and the whole community we must have had 100 people shoveling mud out of the senior housing units that were there and cleaning up the rugs. And, it was a town that got together. It was a town where I think you're going to do Jerry Long and
yes, and Ron Sutton.
And Ron Sutton, where you had people like Jerry Long who they weren't making any money. They were doing it, for the good of the community.
Right. And that's was there, and sometimes that kind of gets lost when you get a bigger community.
Yes.
Because everybody doesn't know everybody anymore.
Yes.
And so that has changed a bit, but it doesn't mean that there still can't be people who are doing that.
Yes, and there are people that are in the shadows
Yeah.
that are just going, oh boy, this is a great thing. This is a great town. The schools are still very, very good. I have the great honor of having, as I said, 5 of them.
Yeah.
And so we're able to take kids. I take a grandson who's named after me to school every day at Vintage Hills and pick them up to help out my daughter-in-law, picking up the granddaughters at PMS, picking up another grandson at Amador.
Yeah.
It's really blessed that we're here.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're blessed that some of your family lives here too. How nice for them.
Yeah, that they're all there, that so
Yeah.
many of the kids. Yeah. And this museum has been, an unbelievable organization. What's also been fun for me is I'm not original like Gene Pons.
Yes.
But I got to know, like Joe Rose, officer number 1.
Yeah.
Joe and I became good buddies. Cosmo, our barber down there, we used to meet all the time. He used to, every day, Joe used to sit in that corner of the museum over here when the police department was here, and the alarm would go off on the...
Yeah, over the sign.
The sign, right. And then knowing, Cold Hardware, in my office, I have the original Cold Hardware safe. 125 years ago, it came over by boat from New York into San Francisco, and then from there it was taken by wagon train and put over here, to the hardware store. And I've still got all the original lettering on it. And that was Gary Ferris, remember, who had the hardware store for so many years.
Yeah.
So I've been able to keep some of that old, memorabilia.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So thank you for all you do, and for the museum,
Yeah.
and keeping this all alive. And if you ever want back the painting, do you remember the giant painting at the bank up here, where Chase Bank is?
Yes. Yes.
There's a painting which must be 20 feet long,
Yeah.
8 feet tall. It was painted in 1984
Carol.
of the of the racetrack.
Yes.
And when the bank, Chase bought it, because of all the bank collapses, they got rid of it. So it is in our office facility. So if the museum, we were gonna, do you remember the Allens, Giovanni Allen?
Oh.
She was my accountant. We were close friends.
Yeah.
So we had no room for that monster.
Yeah.
So I've kept it. So if you ever want it back,
Okay.
I've got it.
Okay.
1984, yeah.
Okay.
So I have a little bit of memorabilia that
Yeah.
I've kept. Yeah.
Yeah. The Allens were so helpful to the museum, weren't they?
They were.
Yeah.
Well, actually, she is the one who got me into the museum,
Okay.
because and Jim.
Yeah.
Jim. I think he's passed away, but
No, they're still
are they in
Palm
Palm Springs? Are they? Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my boring.
Oh, very exciting life. But one thing you didn't mention,
Mhm.
and I think we've talked about before, is that you help young people, if they've got an idea for an invention. Tell me what you're doing with that.
So there are a lot of very, very smart individuals, much smarter than me. And what I've done is, since I haven't used a law firm in years, I write my own patents because it's a waste not to. I do my own research, and so if there's a young person or anybody who has an idea, come to me, and we will sit down and we'll kind of talk about what it is you want to do, and then we'll do research. It's amazing now. It used to be the U.S. Patent Office, USPTO, and you had to go down to the stacks to look up all the records to see what's out there. Then USPTO put it online, but it stinks. It's government. It stinks. No offense, but to government. But anyway, now under Google, you can do patent searches. So I search to see what the invention idea is. And, it's in the world of inventing, there's so many simple things that can be very, very, very lucrative, like dots. He's the guy who invented the dot that you glue on the road when you're driving down the lanes.
Yeah, yeah.
He made a fortune. People
Yeah.
made a fortune after that, on those kinds of inventions. So we sit down, I'll do the research, we'll see if it's possible, and then we'll figure out if we need to write a patent. And then I fund all the activity for for that individual, and then we split whatever the proceeds are. Now, sometimes most of the time, there's a lot of stuff that's been invented now, and the patents, when I started in the patent world, believe it or not, companies didn't focus on patents. And I used to give this communicopia in New York every year, be 300 people, 400 people, by Morgan Stanley. They'd have me as the featured speaker talking about invention. And that there are a lot of things that you can patent that you just need to think. In fact, one of my professors, I hope we're not taking up too much time here, one of my professors in college, in graduate school, we walked into the classroom, and he said, okay, you're all really smart grad students. He goes to the board and he writes R, big R, equals R. And then he says, serendipity. Okay, you're all smart graduate students. What does that mean? What does R equals R mean? And serendipity. Tell me. We didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Would you know what R equals R? Serendipity? No. Michael Bruner, who's doing the recording, who I've known since a little kid, would you know what R equals? Yeah. It's like, what are you talking about? Well, risk equals reward. And serendipity means that you need to serendipitously look at something and how can I make that better or fix it? So, true story. How was TV Guide invented? How did I patent TV Guide? Totally true story. My son Chris, the big executive, he was born in 1980. He was 4 years old, 1984. We were sitting on a Saturday morning watching Bugs Bunny cartoons. In those days, in 84, you had TV Guide.
Right.
You paid $2 for TV Guide. He had a glass of orange juice in his hands. I reached over to get TV Guide. The orange juice spilled on my lap. And all of a sudden, serendipitously, why can't you put a TV Guide on the screen? Well, there were many engineering technical problems with that. Okay, one, in 1984, there were 30 channels of 30 cable channels, what there were. So you needed 4 meg of memory to store 7 days of 30 channel TV program information.
Okay.
4 meg of memory in 1984 was $500,000.
Wow.
In 1984. That's how memory has come down. So your cell phone,
Yeah.
Michael's or yours, in those terms would be costs about $22 to $25 million for the cell phone you carry today. The second major technical issue in 1984 was television was all analog. And that meant that the scan lines, there are 23 lines of data in a VBI line of television, and it's in analog you could get no more than maybe 8 data text lines without it, and they were fuzzy transmitting. There was no digital television. So in order to manufacture a digital television, it wasn't there, and in order to even make the character generator for 8 lines was about $250. So if you wanted a box with a guide, first you'd spend $500,000 for the memory, and then you would spend at least $3,000 or $4,000 for the character generator. So your cable box would cost you about $700,000.
Yeah. And no one's going to do that.
Nobody's going to do that. So the amount of people that told me it was a stupid idea, you have no idea how many people. I would begin talking to individuals and they'd say, you are crazy. But I believed that someday memory would come down and someday character generators, television would be digital. And where that came from is I used to sit in control rooms, running the Miss Universe feed to 23 countries, and I knew the technology would get caught up. So we began writing the patents in 1984, 85, 86. We were writing it way ahead of technology. So when we went public, I think it was 90. Yeah, it was 93. We were the hottest issue in Wall Street ever. We were the book, it's called, was 300% oversubscribed the night before. And the reason for that is I was able to find visionaries to fund me. So one visionary was a producer, Aaron Spelling, from Los Angeles.
Yep.
Aaron Spelling, Love Boat, you name it, right? The whole Spelling empire. And I flew down to LA, and I met with Aaron, and he liked one of the inventions that I had, I was co-inventor of, called the Vine, the Video Information Network. And what that was is you're watching a TV show, and the show comes on, and there's an ad for, like, say, Sitmar Cruises. Oh, that's interesting. So under Vine, you press a button, and it switches to another channel, and then there's a video of Sitmar Cruises, dates that its cruises are going to be on. So it's a way of, again, this was way before our time. And so Aaron was the one who produced all those little, spot advertisements. So he thought, this is great. So he gave me $2 million. So at one point we had Aaron's $2 million, and then I went to Viacom because of our relationship with Viacom, and Sumner Redstone gave us $5 million. So that was $7 million. And we went to Martha Morris Ford, who is the great-granddaughter of Henry Ford, and FAO Schwartz, the owners of FAO Schwartz. It was called mezzanine financing. So we went around and we showed them our idea, and then we also went to, we got patents. We patent attorneys to verify that you could not do a guide without coming through our patents. And at one point we had $20 some million in the bank and 7 employees and a run rate of nothing. But the reason I'm describing this is it was all based upon an orange juice spill on my lap, and it was serendipity. The reason for the time tick transmission is my wife wanted to record a Wimbledon match on a VCR. They couldn't figure out how to set the clock, so she couldn't record it. So that's when, why can't you take the transmission, put it in a chip, and have the time? So I say to every young inventor, every old inventor, look for serendipitous opportunities, take the risk, spend the time, and the worst that's going to happen is you've wasted your time of not getting the invention. But that's not a waste, because, I read an interesting article several years ago about invention, and the issue with today, like my grandkids, everybody's on YouTube, which is fine, but invention is often created by idleness. And if you're entirely consumed with visual images all the time, you're not thinking, unless you're really like a good YouTuber. Like there's some really brilliant ones, much smarter and much wealthier than I am. But for kids today, it takes away a lot of the inventiveness because it's presented to them. And they're not having, to think about it. And the other thing is patience. Video gaming, so my daughter is an incredible young woman. She got her degree from St. Mary's on her senior year. She wound up to be hired by Sony to launch the video game Prince of Persia, a paid intern, had never been done before with Sony. And now she's an executive at Sony. She's executive producer. I think they've got 200 video games under title. They do $1.2 billion, $200 million in revenue. But at any rate, she will tell you that video gaming is great and it's wonderful, but you really need to restrict it a certain amount. And you also need to try and get the more creative side out of her own kids, and so she's doing that.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, they need that time to be creative,
Yes. And take the time and have the opportunity to invent. But the other piece where I was going with this was patience. So one of my patents took 7 years to issue. Most of my patents took 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And the only reason that I knew the seventh, it was 7 years that, because I'd retired, actually issued, is because there's a company that sends you plaques. And I stopped buying plaques because it got to be ridiculous. And it said, congratulations on the issuance of your new patent.
Oh, okay.
Would you like to buy a plaque? So that's the only reason that I knew that it issued. But the point of this story is 7 years. With video gaming, it's instantaneous gratification, right?
Right.
I win something. You know, it's Minecraft. I've got something built. I've got something designed. Wow, World of Warcraft. You know, I'm buying these tools, and then I wind up playing video games with the grandkids. But anyway, so it's instant gratification.
Yeah.
And the world of invention is not instant gratification. My daughter is working on the most incredible video game, and I got to just get a peek because she has to keep the 4 years in the making.
Oh.
And it's going to be unbelievable, launched by Sony PlayStation. But 4 years in
Yeah.
the making.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that, you know, that's what it takes, the technology.
Who was the person, if you remember, who said that there was nothing more that could be invented?
I don't remember.
Years ago, but
Yes.
remember there was that somebody famous said,
Yes.
yeah, everything that's needs to be invented, or, you know, has been invented already.
Yes.
There's no- But look at all the changes we've come through
Yes.
and all that over the years. Yeah.
And there's so many smart young people today. You know,
Yeah.
it's amazing. The teacher of the year, Kevin Kawai, he's the teacher of the year for the state, I guess, or the county, and he's at Amador High School. He teaches math, I think, and science and whatever. He asked me to, we put a talk together for a group of his students who came up with an invention.
Okay.
And we went through the process with them, and they described the invention. Very smart. And as we were going through the whole process, I'm thinking, these kids are so much smarter than I am, and they're much quicker. And there was one student that, this young man was like amazing. And when I described something, he'd pick it up immediately. Oh, what if we did this? What if we, and I'm going, wow, isn't that amazing? So you do have people like Kevin that are trying to get young people, and he wants to put together things like not just the invention, but the business plan. Because another thing I've learned dramatically is the world is full of very brilliant and unsuccessful inventors. Because the problem with invention is the inventor never freezes the design, it's called. Oh, I can modify it. Oh, I'm going to keep changing it. Oh. And some of that from my UCLA psychology days is the fear of failure. Because if you never launch the product, you don't fail.
Right.
So you have to be in the mindset that, one, you're going to have failures. I spent $175,000 on a product I thought was going to be incredible. Total fiasco. Never made it. It was done with Disney. This is called the sports box seat. I'll show it to you sometime.
Okay.
Disney liked it. They bought a fortune in them for the for basketball games, whatever. But it never went anywhere. And actually, Alameda County Fairgrounds bought the product. So I've had that. I've had where you get a patent, and I hope I'm not getting too much off subject here.
No.
Where you spend money. I spent $100,000 on a patent. I contacted Johnson Control, my attorneys did, and they said, well, we have a patent that supersedes that. But it's impossible. We just got the patent. Well, they had filed a patent 6 days on the same invention before mine.
Oh.
And the problem in the United States, it's only in the United States, is when you file a patent, the patent that you do is all ex parte, meaning it's only you in the patent office. And no one in the outside world sees that until the date of issuance.
Okay.
In Europe, I have European patents. In Europe, what you do is when you file, or Japan, I have Japanese patents. When you file a patent there, it's public. And then people can comment on it. So you have these, what are called submarine patents that are out there. So Johnson Control had filed 6 days before me, and the only way you can swear back up to 12 months before the invention, or the time you put it into the patent office, if you have documentation showing that you've done that. Well, in this case, my documentation didn't go back as far as Johnson Controls.
Oh.
So there was a waste of $100-some thousand, which because of a submarine patent. So when I explain these things But people, I said, don't get discouraged though, because there's plenty more things to.
But see, that's such a great thing to do, because I think a lot of people probably thinking about dealing with patent office is like, I can't do it. You know,
Yes.
it's too much work, it's, you know, whatever. And so to know someone who's gotten patents and who will help them, you know,
Yes.
through the process is amazing.
And another thing I did, and I don't know if we should keep going, but one other thing that I learned very early on is, you know, patent examiners are usually young people out of law school, and they have not successfully gotten a job, no offense to them, with a law firm.
Yeah.
So they go into patent work, because the government's always hiring patent attorneys, and it's a very difficult job to be a patent attorney, very technical, and there are different units based on units, meaning that this unit is electronic, and this unit is medicine, and this unit is drugs. And but I have also learned that the examiners like the inventor, because they hate the attorneys, because the attorneys they have to work with all the time are always giving them all these different issues, and they're arguing with them. So I used to fly back to Washington to the patent office and meet with the examiner and describe my invention. And then one of the things I did, because I like to
And is that unusual? Most people don't.
Most people don't do that.
Okay.
And we got all the patents. And I actually had the patent examiner sitting with me going, oh, I can't tell you if that's going to pass. But on the other hand, maybe if you had something a little different, because they've got other patents pending.
Yeah.
So they can't tell you, but they can guide you.
Okay.
And they're very nice to you because they're sitting, you know, with the inventor. And the other thing that I did, which turned out to be very successful, is I was asked by the U.S. Patent Office to go back to Washington and do a class on new technology and communications for the patent examiners.
Oh.
So I had a whole room, massive room with patent examiners, and I brought my engineering team in, and we explained to the examiner the technology that was going to be coming and how it would all work, because these folks are just out of school,
Yeah.
or they've been around a while, and they want to know, you know, what the future is.
Yeah.
So the other key, I think, is to be open to working with the government, be open to working people, to educate.
And well, and your partnerships that you've done with so many different people, you know, teamwork is really important.
It is. And back to the Pleasanton, I think for us, it's been a wonderful experience here because there's so many good people who have a desire to have the community succeed, you know, and really smart people, much smarter than me.
So who would you say is somebody you really have admired in Pleasanton? I mean, you've named some names, but who?
Well, currently it's John Sensiba.
Oh,
Currently, John, I view John, he's younger than I am by 15 years, I guess, or something like that. But John is a genius. And John is the one who got Stanford to buy ValueCare. And that in and of itself was a fascinating, tremendous effort because, you know, the competition was UCSF, Kaiser, Stanford, and then there was, I think it was Sutter Health. I don't know if you knew any of this.
yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I was on the Medical Foundation board, which was the docs.
Yeah.
Okay. Not on the board of directors. Part of it is I've always stayed off the board of directors. This is one of the few boards, this and Boy Scouts, because of the liability.
Oh, okay.
So I've stayed off of boards because of liability.
Yeah.
Even though I have officers and directors insurance and whatever. But the hospital was, should we keep going or not?
Yeah. No, I'd like to hear this.
So the hospital was in very, very serious trouble. Very serious trouble. I don't think people had any clue to the trouble it was in. And, you know, Marcy was an incredible, wonderful woman who was really good at the beginning and did a lot of stuff, and then things kind of got out of hand and expenses and all that. But we were literally, as a community, within 2 months of not being able to make debt commitments. The hospital would be out of business. It was really bad.
And that would have been dire for us. Yeah.
Yeah, lose the hospital. In the meantime, you had this genius in John Sensible, good friend, genius young guy. And he was able to get all of these different communities, or different medical organizations to come in to bid. So the hospital itself, and I don't remember the guy that was working for Stanford. He had just left UCLA, where I still had some pretty big connections. In fact, my sister, who passed away a couple of years ago, she was a very famous author. Had written over 60 books or something like that. She used to work for the UCLA Medical Center for the doctors. She would publish or perish. The doctors have to publish. She would write all the stuff for the doctors for them.
Oh.
And then she also had other books that she did. But at any rate, so I'm pretty familiar with UCLA. He came up and he decided that Stanford should expand and become a hospital that could cover the entire United States. I had a great meeting with the guy. I can't remember his name. And Valley Care would be a teaching hospital, and it would be a hospital where you could bring in new doctors, and those doctors would learn from the hospital, and then this would be the perfect footprint to take it to Poughkeepsie, or to take it, and Stanford Health could grow all over the country. He and I sat down, he talked about it, he was a great guy. I'm sure John knows infinitely more than I do. I was tangential, and that was the idea. So we had this almost like bidding that was taking place. And we thought the Kaiser was serious. Okay? So I wound up supporting a political candidate for president who did not win. But I was on a private plane with the wife of the CEO of Kaiser, and I was describing, because I was hawking the hospital,
Yeah,
because we were looking for somebody.
right.
But John was doing all that. I was just, again, tangential.
Yeah.
I just happened to be on this private aircraft flying down to Los Angeles for this big meeting with this presidential candidate who lost, private luncheon with him.
Okay.
And she says to me, you know, there's no way that Kaiser would ever buy Valley Care Hospital. The doctors would never go for it, because they have a very low opinion of the doctors at Valley Care.
Oh,
Snooty. Very snooty. So I told John about it. I said, well, you know, but it didn't matter because nobody needed to know that.
right.
Okay. And so then John was able to bring this brilliant guy in from Stanford who wanted to make this model of hospitals everywhere. And he was able to convince Stanford to buy the hospital. And you know, you'll have to ask John, but I think it's $1.2 billion or $1.3 billion that they've invested so far in Valley Care.
I don't know. Now, I interviewed John, and he
Yes.
mentioned that he was on the board, and he didn't mention any of this.
Yes, okay.
He's very humble. He's a great
humble,
guy.
wonderful
Yes.
guy. You know, now he's a little bit more, I was more in the shadows. John is not as much in the shadows.
Yeah.
Because he has a business.
'Cause he has a bit.
He has a business, you know, and it's a very successful business. But yes, so at any rate, he was able to brilliantly save from total disaster. I can't stress enough how bad it was. It really was. Because I had the son that's at Penumbra, and it's not a plug for Penumbra, but it's a great company. He was at Stanford. He was hired by Marcy. He ran human resources, operations, and all that. And he worked with the CFO, Ken Jensen, at the time. And actually, my son, I think, hired Ken's daughter, I think. But at any rate, there was a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Bonds that you had no, I mean, it was just like, you know, unbelievable.
So, see, it's always good to hear about these stories because, like I said, I interviewed John,
Yes.
and he didn't go into all this detail, you know, and so it's wonderful to hear, and that you think so highly of him. He is,
Yes.
he is a good
He's
guy.
great. But
Yeah.
you interviewed Jerry, you haven't done Jerry yet around Sutton? have
Oh,
you?
yes.
You did them? Yeah.
They're
Just
also
they
wonderful
care.
people. Yeah.
You know, they care.
We have we have a lot of wonderful people in Pleasanton.
We do. And some of the past people, you know, Ken was great.
Yeah.
Cheryl Michelotti, I don't know if you remember her.
Yeah.
You know, city councilwoman. She was great. She always had the best interests of the community. For that matter, even though he can be a wacko at times, Scott Haggerty was really good for us, you know.
Yeah.
I have some stories on Scott, which we won't have on film. But,
Okay.
you know, he was really good. There was just a lot of people. What is it, the Molinaro family? You know, we did, since we had 5 kids, all graduating from Amador or Foothill. There were 5, and I mentioned this before, we had 5 grad nights as senior parents, and then we would do the grad night as the junior parents to get used to so there was a lot of grad nights we did. And the Molinaro family, they were always so supportive of the picking up the trash, doing anything we needed, donating money.
Yeah.
Vic Malazan at Vic's All-Star Kitchen,
Yeah.
he was really a wonderful person,
Yeah.
involved. But there's still, it's just a bigger community now. You
Yeah.
just kind of have to get used to it, that's all.
Well, to wrap it up, I'm just going to ask.
Well, I'm sorry it took so long.
Oh, no, this has
Yeah.
been lovely. But did you actually deal face-to-face with Rupert Murdoch?
Well, yes, very much so. Actually,
And I just, any stories about that?
well, I can tell you, very
Okay.
much so. So when we first wrote the first patent, the reason we were litigating is he had created a company called Gemstar, which the CEO wound up being indicted. A $30 million lawsuit against him, federal government indicted him. But when I first invented the patents, we met with Rupert Murdoch. He summoned me to New York. And he told me, all true, he with his attorney Arthur Siskin told me that he was going to bury us. Totally bury us. What he did not know is that we had gotten the $2 million from Aaron Spelling, and we were walking down the street to get $5 million from Viacom, but he was going to bury me.
Okay.
There was no way. Okay, so then we fast forward. Gemstar is a public company. Gemstar seems to be doing well, but they'd stolen all of our stuff. And so I had a $500 million lawsuit against them. I had $500 million lawsuit against, we never lost, by the way, ever. And I think that's the reason why Microsoft just doesn't pay you 25 cents for a copy of their application if they think they can get away with it. No offense to Microsoft.
Right.
Would anybody, right? Okay, so we fast forward to, I'm in litigation against Scientific Atlanta. That was a arbitration, $500 million. I was in U.S. court in International Trade Court in Washington against Charlie Erkin and Dish Network, because they have a guide. They stole it. He had to settle. And I was in litigation in San Jose, U.S. federal court under Judge White against Murdoch and Gemstar. And they were losing. And the inventor that they chose, I will never forget, this is a great story. The inventor that they were hanging their hat on was a guy named Michael Levine, who had a patent that I had actually destroyed in the sense that I found all the prior art to it, so it wasn't even valid because there was all this prior art. And I'm sitting on the witness stand, and I was relaying on the witness 5 days on the stand. I was relaying that the inventor that they had chosen had said to me, owning a patent. Michael Levine said, owning a patent and having a patent, you're like a tree parasite. And he said, what that means is that I get a patent, and then like a tree parasite, I attach it to the body, and I get off just enough nourishment so I can get money, but the tree doesn't die. In this case, the parasite gets enough to live. And so he filed all these patents so he could say, you could either sue me or just settle, and we'll just, suck off a little bit. So I presented that in front of Judge White, and Judge White just was. So it wasn't going well. So I was asked to come down to Los Angeles, to Fox Studios, which, by the way, as a child, I spent a lot of time at Fox Studios, right? I mean, this is the, long before Murdoch had any of Fox.
Yeah.
I was in a family that was involved in the entertainment side of it, right? Creating entities. And so I went into his office. It was just he and I. Just mano-y-mano. And so, we shook hands. And he was very nice. I reminded him of, you're going to bury me. And that's not going to happen. And bottom line, he was very, very, very reasonable. He was very, very, very nice to me. And we wound up making a lot of money for our shareholders. We wound up merging the companies into one public company. And Aaron Spelling made $100 million on a $2 million investment. So Aaron Spelling loved me,
Oh, yeah.
right? Okay. So anyway, that was my negotiation with him, and he was not a bad sort. He was smart enough to know when it was time
To give it.
to give it. Yeah. But it all sounds wonderful and all that. But at the end of the day, I'll remember a conversation I had with my main law firm was Wilson, Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati. They're in Silicon Valley. They've done every major deal there, whatever. And I was walking with my attorney, who's since retired, and we're walking. We just left Murdoch. We had met with Murdoch, and that same day we went and met with Jerry Levin, the chairman of Time Warner, and then we were walking to see Sumner Redstone. He says, "This is true." He says, "Mike, aren't we hot shit?" I said, No. We're just a couple of guys schlepping here in New York, and all I want to be is retired and spend time with my family and the kids. And that's why I retired 27 years ago, because it was the pinnacle. And one thing my father taught me, my father always knew when it was time to end a show. We're on top. It's whatever the show would be, Green Acres. It's time to end it. We need to end it. And Jerry Seinfeld was a genius in that. Jerry Seinfeld, #1 rated show, right? And Jerry went, okay, it's time to end it. We don't have any new things. And for me, it was time to end it and just focus on the community. And we did the bulk of the funding and all that at Pleasanton after I had retired, because, that's what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for allowing me to
Thank you
pontificate.
so much. Yes. It was wonderful to
Thank you
have
so
you
much.
here. All right.
And I, as the cameraman, I get to see your son, who I've known since he was a little kid.
Yes.
And he's very talented.
Yes. So,
Graduated in 1999, too, from Amador, just exactly when son #2 graduated. Yeah. Thank you so much.
thank you.